The mysterious bracelet. Jake was just a scavenger. He had spent years searching through old ruins, abandoned ships, and wrecked space stations, hoping to find something valuable. Most of the time, he only found scraps, broken circuits, rusted metal, and useless junk. But today was different. He stood inside the remains of an ancient alien ship, deep in the dark ruins of a forgotten battlefield. The air smelled of dust and old metal. The ship had crashed centuries ago, and everything inside was covered in thick layers of dirt and time. His flashlight flickered as he walked down a narrow corridor, his boots crunching against shattered glass and debris. Jake didn't believe in luck, but when his eyes caught something glowing beneath a pile of metal, he couldn't help but feel excited. Carefully, he reached down and pushed the debris aside. There, half buried in the wreckage, was a bracelet. It wasn't just any bracelet. It pulsed with a faint blue light, as if it were still alive. Strange symbols glowed along its surface, shifting and changing as he stared at them. It looked expensive, ancient, and powerful. Jake had seen a lot of alien artifacts before, but nothing like this. Well, what do we have here? He muttered to himself. He picked up the bracelet and turned it in his hands. It was smooth and cold, but the moment his fingers touched the glowing symbols, a sharp tingling sensation ran up his arm. His heart pounded. Jake hesitated. His instincts told him to leave it alone. Strange alien technology was always dangerous, but his greed whispered a different idea. If this thing was valuable, he could sell it for a fortune. Maybe even retire from scavenging forever. Might as well try it on, he thought. Without another second of hesitation, he slipped the bracelet onto his wrist. The moment it locked in place, the world around him changed. A jolt of electricity shot through his body. His vision blurred, and a wave of pain crashed into his skull. He stumbled backward, clutching his head as a deep, unfamiliar voice echoed in his mind. "You have the indeed with me." Jake's breath caught in his throat. He looked around, but there was no one there. The ship was silent. The voice came again, louder this time. "You are now connected, so you will bind for eternity." His pulse raced. What did that mean? Connected to what? Then, out of nowhere, a holographic figure appeared before him. It was a woman. No, an alien. She had sharp features, deep violet skin, and piercing golden eyes. She wore intricate battle armor, glowing with energy, and she did not look happy. She crossed her arms and stared at Jake with disgust. Human. This must be a mistake. Jake took a step back. What the hell are you? The alien woman tilted her head as if she was scanning him. You are unworthy. This bond was never meant for you. Jake looked down at the bracelet. The glowing symbols had stopped shifting. Instead, they formed a single word in an alien language, one that somehow he could now understand. Soulbond. His stomach twisted. Soulbond. That sounded bad. Really bad. Look, Jake said, lifting his hands. I don't know what's going on, but I didn't sign up for this. I was just. The alien woman cut him off. Silence, human. You have no idea what you have done. Her golden eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Jake felt an intense pressure in his mind, like someone was digging through his thoughts. His breath caught as emotions flooded through him. Anger, loss, betrayal, a deep burning hatred. Jake gasped. Hey, stop that. The feeling vanished, but his legs felt weak. The alien woman watched him with a cold expression. The bond is complete. We are now linked. Whatever you feel, I feel. Whatever pain you suffer, I suffer. Jake's blood ran cold. You mean, we're stuck together? The alien's face hardened. Until death. A silence stretched between them. Jake tried to pull the bracelet off, but it wouldn't budge. He twisted, yanked, even tried to pry it off with his knife. Nothing worked. The alien smirked. It cannot be removed, fool. The only way to break a soulbond is for one of us to die. Jake's stomach dropped. This wasn't just some fancy alien tech. This was a curse. Before he could process the full weight of the situation, the ship shook violently. A deep rumbling echoed through the corridor, followed by the distant sound of something approaching. The alien woman's expression turned serious. They found us. Jake's heart pounded. Who? She looked at him, her golden eyes burning. The ones who want me dead. And now, thanks to you, they'll kill us both. The ship shook again, harder this time. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the darkness. Jake swallowed hard. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into. But one thing was clear. His life would never be the same again. The alien connection. The ship trembled again, metal groaning under unseen pressure. Dust rained from the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance, a loud mechanical hiss echoed through the corridors. Jake barely had time to process the terrifying words the alien woman had just spoken. The ones who want me dead. And now, thanks to you, they'll kill us both. His pulse pounded in his ears. Hold on, who's coming? And why do they want you dead? The alien woman, Ziara, as the name suddenly surfaced in his mind, like a memory that wasn't his, narrowed her golden eyes. No time for explanations, human. We must move. She turned sharply and started running down the corridor, her holographic form flickering as she moved. Jake hesitated for only a second before cursing under his breath and sprinting after her. I don't even know who the hell you are, he shouted, leaping over a fallen beam. And yet you bound our souls together. Ziara shot back without looking at him. Your foolishness has cost us both. Jake gritted his teeth. He wasn't going to take the blame for something he didn't understand. He hadn't known the bracelet was some kind of death contract. The ground shook violently beneath his feet, and a deep metallic groan came from somewhere in the distance. The air filled with the scent of burning metal, and Jake could hear a faint, rhythmic thudding, like heavy boots marching in perfect unison. Whoever was coming, they weren't human. The painful truth. As they ran, a sudden sharp pain stabbed through Jake's skull. He cried out and staggered, clutching his head. A wave of rage, pure, burning anger, rushed through his chest like a wildfire. For a moment, he wasn't himself. He saw flickering images, a grand alien city engulfed in flames, the cries of warriors fighting a hopeless battle, a massive battleship looming over the skies like a god of war. Then, just as quickly as it came, the vision snapped away. Jake gasped, blinking rapidly. His body was drenched in sweat, his heart racing. He looked at Ziara. What the hell was that? She had stopped running and was watching him carefully. Our connection, she said coldly. When you put on that bracelet, you became linked to me. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. Jake's stomach twisted. You mean? I just saw your memories. She didn't answer. Instead, she took a slow step forward, her golden eyes boring into his. I felt your fear, she murmured, almost to herself. You've never been in a real battle before. Never killed. Jake clenched his jaw. Yeah, well, I'm just a scavenger. I don't fight wars. Ziara's gaze darkened. Then you are unprepared for what is coming. The rhythmic thudding sound was getting louder. Jake didn't know what was scarier, the fact that an alien army was apparently hunting them down, or the fact that he was now bound to a war-hardened alien warrior who could feel everything he felt. And worse, he could feel her too. The enemy arrives. A loud hiss came from the corridor ahead, followed by a mechanical clank. Jake's breath caught in his throat as something stepped into view from the shadows. It was a towering, hulking machine. No, not a machine. A cybernetic warrior, its body made of dark metal and smooth organic plating. Red slit-like eyes glowed from its helmet-like face, and behind it, more figures emerged, a whole squad. Jake instinctively reached for his blaster, only to remember he had dropped it during the bracelet incident. "Great," he muttered. "We're dead." Ziara remained eerily calm. The lead cyborg warrior tilted its head at her. When it spoke, its voice was cold, mechanical, and filled with contempt. "Princess Zara, you cannot escape your fate." Jake blinked. "Princess." He barely had time to process that revelation before the cyborg lifted a massive energy rifle and pointed it directly at his head. "By order of the Dominion," the cyborg intoned, "both of you are to be executed." Jake's mind went blank. His instincts screamed at him to run. Hide. Do something. "But Zaira," she smirked. "The power of the bond." "You think you can kill me?" Zaira's voice was dangerously low. "Try." Before Jake could even react, his body moved on its own. No, he didn't move himself. Zaira had moved, and the bond forced him to follow. His legs kicked forward, and in a blink, he was diving sideways just as the cyborg fired. A searing plasma blast tore through the air where his head had just been. Jake barely had time to gasp before Ziara's next action forced his body into motion again. She lunged, and Jake felt it, like a ghostly force pulling his limbs. Even though she was only a hologram, something in the bond was controlling his muscles, his reflexes, his movements. He ducked, rolled, and without knowing why, his hands flew out and grabbed a metal pipe from the ground. Ziara's voice echoed in his mind. "Strike left." Jake had no idea what she meant, but his arms moved anyway. He swung the pipe, just as one of the cyborgs lunged at him. The impact sent a violent shockwave through his arms, but the cyborg's head snapped to the side from the force. Sparks flew. Jake gasped for breath. What the hell is happening? Ziara, still calm, flicked her wrist. "You are learning." Jake had no time to argue. The cyborgs were already regrouping. One of them raised a glowing blade. Another charged a plasma cannon. Jake's entire body tensed as he realized something horrifying. He wasn't just fighting for his life. If he died, Zara would die too. His breath shuddered. For the first time in his life, Jake knew this wasn't a fight he could run from. He gritted his teeth and adjusted his grip on the pipe. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. The war within. Jake's arms ached. His breath came in sharp, ragged gasps as he struggled to process what had just happened. His fingers trembled around the cold, dented pipe he had used to smash a cybernetic soldier's faceplate. Sparks still flickered from its shattered optics. But there was no time to celebrate survival, because the remaining Dominion enforcers were regrouping. They moved like a machine, synchronized, precise, unshaken. Their glowing crimson eyes locked onto Jake and Zara, like wolves stalking wounded prey. And Jake felt Zara's thoughts rush through his mind. Calculate the enemy's position. Anticipate the next move. Do not hesitate. Kill or be killed. Her instincts crashed into his like a tidal wave. It was overwhelming, like suddenly knowing how to fight, but not knowing why. The bond between them wasn't just a link. It was a forced merging of thoughts, emotions, and reflexes. Jake wasn't a warrior. He had spent his life scavenging, avoiding danger, not running straight at it. But now, his body wanted to fight, because Zara wanted to fight, and he wasn't sure he could stop it. The battle for control. "They're surrounding us," Jake yelled, trying to take a step back. His own legs refused to obey. Instead, his muscles tightened as if an invisible force was pulling them forward. Ziara's instincts were overriding his own, pushing him into a warrior's stance, forcing him to engage. He felt a pulse of annoyance from Zara. "Stop resisting." Resisting. Jake snapped, dodging an energy blast that nearly took his head off. "I'm trying not to die." "Then fight." Zara's voice wasn't angry, but it wasn't exactly patient either. Another enforcer charge. Jake's hands moved without his permission, flipping the metal pipe into a reverse grip. He pivoted on his heel, swung hard. Kuraki. The impact hit the enforcer's joint, sending it stumbling. Jake hadn't done that. Zara had. Or worse, the bond had. The link deepens. Jake was panicking now. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just some sci-fi telepathy trick. The more they fought, the more he felt himself slipping. Like the bond was swallowing him. Like he wasn't Jake anymore. Like he was becoming her. No. He shoved back against the connection, mentally clawing at his own thoughts, trying to push Zara's influence out. But she felt him struggling. And she pushed back. Hard. Jake's vision flashed, and suddenly, he wasn't in the ruined ship anymore. He was standing on a burning battlefield, surrounded by towering armored figures. The sky above was streaked with the wreckage of destroyed warships. The ground was littered with bodies. And in his hands, no, in Zara's hands, was a massive blood-stained energy blade. Jake gasped as the vision overtook him. His own consciousness felt distant, like he was trapped in someone else's body. The weight of years of war, loss, and fury settled on his shoulders. Zara's mind wrapped around his like a serpent, her emotions twisting into his own. Rage, loss, hatred, a lifetime of bloodshed, pain, and betrayal. Jake screamed, falling into darkness. The vision shattered. He was back in the ship, his body drenched in sweat. His breathing was shallow, his heart hammering like it was trying to escape his ribcage. But the battlefield hadn't left him. The emotions were still there, boiling in his chest like lava. And worse, they felt right. The Dominion enforcers rushed forward, weapons raised. Jake didn't think. He lunged. His hands knew what to do before his mind did. He ducked beneath a plasma shot, slid forward, and struck a cybernetic warrior's leg with surgical precision. The enforcer crumpled, and before it could recover, Jake brought the metal pipe down, hard, against the back of its skull. Another came at him from the side. He spun before it could attack, driving his elbow into its midsection. Then, using the momentum, he kicked its leg out from under it and slammed its head into the ground. He was fighting like a soldier. No, not a soldier. Like a Xelfar warrior. Like Zara. The remaining enforcers hesitated for the first time. They adjusted their stance, reassessing their target. Jake felt Zara's smirk inside his own mind. Now you understand. Jake stood frozen, his breathing heavy. His fingers clenched the metal pipe so tightly his knuckles turned white. And in that moment, he realized something terrifying. He hadn't been forced to move that time. That last attack, he had done it himself. What am I becoming? The bond was changing him. It wasn't just about sharing emotions or hearing thoughts. It was rewriting him. The way he stood, the way he moved, the way he thought. And the worst part, it felt good. Zara's voice whispered through his mind, smug and satisfied. Now, scavenger, do you still wish to run? Jake swallowed hard. He couldn't answer. Because for the first time in his life, he didn't know if he was still himself. Or if he was becoming something else. Something dangerous. The hunter's arrival. The battle had left Jake shaken. His hands still trembled, the weight of the metal pipe in his grip heavier than it should have been. His breaths came quick and sharp, his heart racing like it was trying to break free from his chest. But the real terror wasn't the Dominion enforcers lying motionless at his feet. It was himself. He had fought like a warrior, not a scavenger. His body had moved with the precision of someone trained from birth, executing attacks with ruthless efficiency. He had felt Zara's thoughts, her instincts, her skills. But in those last few moments, he hadn't just followed her lead. He had taken control, and that scared him more than anything. Zara's voice slithered through his mind like silk. You adapt faster than I expected, scavenger. That is promising. Jake clenched his fists, trying to push away the lingering heat of battle in his blood. What the hell is happening to me? Ziara didn't answer. She didn't need to. He could feel the truth just beneath the surface of his own thoughts. The bond between them wasn't just a connection. It was a fusion. A slow, creeping merging of their minds, their bodies, their very beings. And if he wasn't careful, one day, he might wake up and not be Jake anymore. But before he could process that horrifying thought, the air around them shifted. A new presence entered the battlefield. A cold, suffocating aura that made Jake's skin crawl. And then, from the shadows, a slow, deliberate clapping echoed through the ruined ship. Jake turned, and his blood ran cold. Standing atop the wreckage, his massive frame outlined against the dim, flickering emergency lights, was Gorgax the Relentless, the bounty hunter from hell. Gorgax was no ordinary bounty hunter. He was a legend, a terror whispered about in the darkest corners of the galaxy. The Dominion's deadliest weapon, a hunter who never failed to capture his target. And now, his crimson gaze was locked onto Jake and Zara. His armor was a deep obsidian black, etched with battle scars from countless wars. His shoulders were broad, his posture relaxed but radiating power. A long, jagged plasma spear rested in his grip, glowing a deep, malevolent red. Jake barely had time to react before Gorgax spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly growl. Well, I was expecting a chase, but here you are, standing in a pile of broken enforcers. How convenient. Jake took an instinctive step back. We can talk about this, right? Gorgax smirked. You're new to this, aren't you, human? He tilted his head toward Zara. Tell me, princess, does your little pet understand what he's gotten himself into? Jake felt Zara's fury spike through the bond. You dare mock me, Gorgax. Zara's holographic form flickered, her golden eyes blazing. You are nothing more than a Dominion lapdog, chasing scraps of honor that do not belong to you. Gorgax chuckled. Oh, princess, you wound me. His smile vanished, replaced by something far darker. But you know why I'm here. The bounty on your head is too good to ignore. And now, he turned his gaze to Jake, his eyes narrowing. You've dragged this pathetic scavenger into your fate. How tragic. Jake swallowed. I didn't ask for this, you know. Gorgax's smirk returned. Doesn't matter. You're bound to her. That makes you my target too. Run or die. Jake's mind raced. They couldn't fight Gorgax. Not like this. He was an elite hunter, trained to take down entire squads of trained killers. Zara seemed to agree because she snapped. We need to move. Now. But Gorgax wasn't going to let them go so easily. He moved. Not like a brute. Not like a slow, heavy warrior. No, he was fast. Before Jake could even register the movement, Gorgax was already there. A massive hand closed around Jake's throat. Jake choked, his feet leaving the ground as Gorgax lifted him like a ragdoll. Zara screamed inside his mind. Fight back. Jake's hand shot up, clawing at the bounty hunter's iron grip, but it was useless. His vision blurred, his lungs burned. Gorgax grinned. You're not ready for this, human. Then he squeezed. Pain. White-hot, blinding pain. Jake's body went rigid as something inside him snapped. The bond. The connection. It flared. Zara's power rushed through his veins. And suddenly, he wasn't choking anymore. He was fighting back. The awakening. Jake's eyes flashed gold, just like Zara's. His body moved on instinct. He twisted, breaking free from Gorgax's grip, landing in a perfect crouch. His reflexes were faster, sharper, inhuman. Gorgax took a half step back, surprised. Oh! Jake barely heard him. His mind was drowning in Zara's power. Every nerve in his body felt alive, electric, like he was burning from the inside out. He lunged, dodging Gorgax's spear strike at the last possible second. His hands moved on their own, reaching for a broken shard of metal from the wreckage. He spun, slashing. Gorgax barely blocked the strike, his spear catching the jagged blade with a loud clash of metal. Sparks flew. Jake was fighting a legend, and he wasn't losing. A dangerous truth. The battle lasted only seconds. Jake dodged, weaved, countered, his body moving too perfectly. Every attack, every dodge, every reaction felt unnatural, because it wasn't him. It was Zara's instincts, and that's when the horror hit him. He wasn't in control. Zara had taken over. His hands weren't his movements weren't his. He was just watching. Zara's voice, now sharp and commanding, echoed through his mind. You cannot beat Gorgax as you are. I am helping you survive. Jake wanted to argue, wanted to scream, but he couldn't. Because right now, Zara was the only thing keeping him alive. And worse, it felt too good to stop. Escape or die. Jake's body moved like a phantom, weaving between Gorgax's attacks with impossible precision. His heart pounded, but his limbs weren't his own. They belonged to her. Zara had taken control. His arms, his legs, even the way he breathed. It was all hers now. He could feel her thoughts guiding him, her battle instincts overriding his hesitation, her rage fueling his every action. Gorgax's plasma spear sliced through the air, missing Jake's throat by inches. The heat from the blade sizzled against his skin, but he didn't feel fear, because Zara wasn't afraid. Instead, his body twisted, ducking low, his foot kicking out to sweep Gorgax's legs. The bounty hunter barely stumbled, his massive frame resisting the force, but Jake's, Zara's, next strike was already coming. He launched forward, his fist cracking into Gorgax's armored ribs. Sparks erupted. The impact sent a shockwave through Jake's arm, but it didn't hurt, not like it should have. Instead, a twisted, dangerous thrill coursed through his veins. For the first time in his life, Jake felt powerful. And that was terrifying. The breaking point. Stop. Jake screamed inside his own mind, forcing every ounce of his will against the bond. For a brief, painful moment, he felt resistance, like trying to push back an ocean with his bare hands. But then, all at once, Zara's control snapped. His body lurched, his balance shattering. And suddenly, he was just Jake again, a scavenger, untrained, off balance, completely vulnerable. And Gorgax saw it. The bounty hunter moved in for the kill. A massive metallic fist slammed into Jake's chest, sending him flying backward. He crashed into a pile of debris, pain exploding through his ribs. His vision blurred, black spots dancing at the edges. The taste of blood filled his mouth. Zara's voice roared inside his skull. Fool, you will get us killed. Jake coughed, forcing himself upright. Then stop, taking over. Gorgax was already advancing, his plasma spear humming with energy. No time to argue. The gamble. Jake's instincts screamed for him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The ship's corridor behind him was caved in, and Gorgax blocked the only exit. But then Jake's eyes darted upward, catching sight of the ruined ceiling above them. A jagged hole in the ship's structure. Beyond it, the stars stretched wide and endless. An escape route. If he could just reach it. Zara's thoughts collided with his. That fall will kill you. Jake wiped blood from his lip and grinned despite the pain. Not if we work together. For the first time, he reached out to Zara willingly. Not as an intruder, not as an enemy, but as a partner. For a split second, there was silence. Then the bond shifted. The energy between them felt different. No longer a battle for control. No longer a war inside his own head. Instead, it was in sync. Gorgax struck, his plasma spear lunging forward. Jake moved. Not as a scavenger, not as a puppet, but as something new. He sidestepped the attack, grabbing a piece of twisted metal from the ground. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled it at a cracked support beam above. The beam gave way, sending a heavy metal panel crashing down, right onto Gorgax. The bounty hunter barely had time to react before he was buried under the wreckage. Jake didn't wait to see if it would hold. He turned, sprinting full speed toward the broken ceiling. "Boost me," he shouted to Ziara. Without hesitation, she did. A pulse of energy surged through his legs, making him faster, stronger. He jumped, higher than he ever could have on his own, his fingers grasping the jagged edge of the hole. He pulled himself up, his muscles screaming, and threw himself out into open space. Zero gravity, zero chances. The second he left the ship, weightlessness took over. He was drifting now, floating in the dark void, the ruined battlefield of orbiting debris stretching around him. His breaths came fast, panic setting in. He hadn't thought this far ahead. What now? Ziara's voice was eerily calm. "Do not fear. I will guide you." Jake clenched his fists. "I'm kind of out of options here." "No, you are not. Look left." He turned his head. A few hundred meters away, barely visible in the darkness, was a scavenger skiff. His own ship docked on the hull of a derelict freighter. Salvation. But between him and the ship was a sea of floating wreckage, shattered engines, twisted metal, loose cargo containers, all tumbling chaotically through space. Jake exhaled. "This is insane." Ziara's smirk blowed through the bond. "Then let us be insane together." The leap of faith. Jake adjusted his body, angling toward the skiff. Then he kicked off the ruined ship. His momentum carried him forward, sending him tumbling through the void. Debris spun around him, jagged metal shards whipping past his face. He twisted midair, narrowly dodging a massive cargo crate. Ziara's instincts guided him, subtle but precise. Faster, closer, almost there. A warning screamed through the bond. Jake's stomach dropped. A shadow moved below him. Gorgax. The bounty hunter had escaped the wreckage, and now he was lunging after Jake, his massive gauntlet reaching for his ankle. Not this time. Jake roared. Without thinking, he spun in midair, twisting his body just enough to evade Gorgax's grasp. The bounty hunter's fingers grazed his boot but missed. Jake slammed into the hull of the scavenger skiff, his fingers desperately clutching the ship's exterior. Gorgax was still floating behind him, but his luck had run out. There was nothing left to grab. The bounty hunter's red eyes locked onto Jake's one last time, filled with cold fury. Then, he was gone, drifting into the abyss. Jake didn't wait around. He scrambled toward the airlock, slapped the override panel, and stumbled inside. The doors hissed shut behind him. Finally, he was safe. A new beginning. Jake collapsed onto the floor of his ship, gasping for air. His entire body ached. His mind felt shattered. And yet, he was still alive. Ziara's voice was soft now, almost thoughtful. "You are not as weak as I first believed." Jake let out a breathless laugh. "Thanks, I guess." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt different now. Not hostile. Not forced. Something else. Jake closed his eyes, finally letting the exhaustion wash over him. He had survived. But something deep inside him whispered, this was only the beginning. The hidden truth. Jake lay on the cold metal floor of his ship, his body aching, his breathing ragged. His chest rose and fell in uneven gasps, every inch of him screaming in exhaustion. The hum of the ship's systems was the only sound in the silence of space. But inside his head, inside the bond, Ziara was still there. Her presence was impossible to ignore. Even with his eyes closed, he could feel her, her energy wrapped around his mind like a second skin, her emotions drifting through his thoughts like whispers in the dark. He hated it, and at the same time, he didn't. Because no matter how much he wanted to fight it, no matter how much he wanted to be just Jake, a simple scavenger, he wasn't that anymore. He wasn't alone anymore. A question with no answer. Jake forced himself to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. He glanced at the flickering control panel across the cockpit, checking his coordinates. The ship was drifting far from the battlefield now. Gorgax was gone, and the Dominion wouldn't find him for a while. For the moment, he was safe. But safe from what? The bounty hunters. The Dominion? Or from himself? Jake exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. All right, let's get this straight. I just fought off a cybernetic hit squad, escaped a bounty hunter from hell, and apparently, I'm now part of some ancient alien bond that won't let me go. He looked at his wrist. The bracelet was still there, pulsing softly, like it was alive. He clenched his fist. So what now? Ziara's voice was calm, unreadable. That depends. Do you intend to continue running for the rest of your short, insignificant life? Jake scoffed. Not exactly what I call encouragement. You misunderstand. Zara's presence shifted slightly, a ripple in the bond. You wish to understand what is happening to you. To us. I can show you. Jake narrowed his eyes. Show me how. The answer came without warning. His vision blurred, his body stiffened, and suddenly, he was somewhere else. The ancient memory. Jake wasn't in his ship anymore. He was standing on a throne room floor, its marble surface cracked and stained with blood. Around him, massive pillars stood broken and ruined, their golden carvings scorched by fire. And ahead of him, a warrior knelt before a throne, blood dripping from her armor. Jake recognized her immediately. It was Ziara, but not the flickering hologram, not the ghostly presence inside his head. This Ziara was real, flesh and blood. Her golden eyes were wild with fury. Her hands trembled as she gripped the hilt of a massive, glowing blade, its edge slick with fresh red. Not human red, but the deep violet of her own kind. At her feet lay a body. A king's body. Jake's breath caught in his throat. What? What am I seeing? Ziara's voice whispered through his mind, distant but clear. The last day of the Selfar Empire. The throne before her was empty. The banners above it hung tattered, their once proud insignias now burned beyond recognition. Jake's stomach twisted. You killed him. Ziara's memory self barely breathed. Yes. The truth of the bond. Jake turned, trying to make sense of the scene around him. The Selfar Empire. He had heard of it. A once mighty civilization, feared across the stars. A race of warriors unmatched in battle, a people so powerful that the Dominion itself had once feared them. But now they were nothing more than a myth. Because they were gone. Jake took a slow step forward. Why? His voice was barely a whisper. Why did you kill your own king? Ziara's voice was hollow. Because he betrayed us. The memory rippled, and suddenly, the throne room changed. Jake was outside now, standing on the burning ruins of a city. Zelfar warriors fought desperately against an invading army, not the Dominion, not bounty hunters, but each other, brother against brother, sister against sister, civil war. Ziara stood at the center of it, her golden eyes darkened with grief, her armor coated in the blood of her own people. Jake swallowed hard. Your empire, it destroyed itself. Yes. The vision shifted again, and now Jake saw the bracelet, the same one wrapped around his wrist. It glowed with ancient power, but it was different. Once, it had been a symbol of unity, a sacred artifact meant only for the strongest of Selfar warriors. But Ziara's hands were covered in blood as she placed it on her own wrist. The bond was supposed to be shared between two warriors, equals, but she had forced it. She had bound herself to no one. Until now. Until Jake. The shattered present. Jake gasped as the vision ripped away, his mind snapping back to reality. He was back in the ship, his body drenched in sweat. His fingers dug into the metal floor, his breathing heavy. Ziara was silent. Jake slowly looked down at the bracelet. This wasn't supposed to happen. His voice shook. You weren't supposed to be bound to me. Ziara's voice came softly, almost hesitant. No. Jake's hands trembled. Then why did it happen? Ziara took a long, slow pause before finally speaking. Because, Jake, the bond does not choose warriors. It chooses survivors. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Jake had always thought of himself as ordinary, a nobody, a scavenger scraping by in a universe that didn't care whether he lived or died. But the bond had chosen him, not because he was strong, not because he was a warrior, but because he had survived. And that meant something. The choice ahead. The ship hummed softly around him, the quiet vastness of space stretching beyond the window. Jake looked down at his hands. Everything had changed. His mind, his body, his very soul. They weren't his alone anymore. He could still feel Ziara, deep inside his thoughts, her presence no longer a battle, but something else, something waiting. And now he had a choice. He could fight this, run from it, pretend he could still live his old life, or he could embrace it, embrace what he was becoming. Ziara's voice broke the silence. So, scavenger, what will you do now? Jake closed his eyes. He already knew the answer. He just wasn't sure if he was ready to say it yet. The final stand. Jake sat in the cockpit of his ship, staring out into the endless void of space. The stars shimmered like distant fireflies, uncaring, eternal. His fingers drummed against the console, restless. He had survived, again. But for how long? The truth of the bond still burned in his mind. The vision Ziara had shown him, the fall of her empire, the blood she had spilled, none of it would leave him. And now he was tied to her, to a past that wasn't his, to a war that had destroyed a civilization. But more than that, the bond had changed him. His body felt different, his reflexes sharper, his mind quicker. Even his instincts weren't his own anymore. When he thought about fighting, his hands moved like they already knew what to do. And worst of all, it wasn't just Ziara's influence. Something inside him had wanted it. And now he had a choice to make. Run or fight. And Jake had never been good at running. The message that changed everything. A sharp beep from his ship's console pulled him out of his thoughts. An incoming transmission. Jake hesitated, then flicked the switch. A distorted hologram flickered to life before him. At first, it was static. But then, a face appeared. A Dominion officer. Sharp-jawed, cold-eyed, dressed in the pristine silver and black armor of the Dominion High Command. Jake's stomach twisted. The officer stared at him for a long moment before speaking. His voice was calm. Too calm. Jake Carter, you are in possession of a classified Selfar artifact. By order of the Dominion, you will surrender yourself immediately. Jake exhaled slowly. Yeah, that's not happening. The officer didn't flinch. We expected resistance, which is why we're sending something to encourage your cooperation. Jake felt Ziara's presence flare in his mind. A warning. Then, outside the cockpit window, space burned. A massive Dominion warship dropped out of hyperspace like a descending god, its hull gleaming in the starlight, weapons already charged. Jake's mouth went dry. Oh hell. No more running. The warship loomed above him, blocking out the stars. Jake's hands flew across the controls, checking his engines, scanning for escape routes. His ship was fast, but against a Dominion battleship, he wouldn't make it 5 seconds. Ziara's voice cut through his panic. You cannot outrun them. Jake scowled. Yeah, thanks. I figured that part out. Then fight. Jake turned his head toward the flickering projection of Ziara. Her golden eyes were unreadable. Jake shook his head. You're insane. That thing has enough firepower to turn us into space dust. And yet, they do not fire. That made him pause. She was right. If the Dominion wanted him dead, they wouldn't have sent a warning. They would have just blown him out of the sky. They needed him alive. Which meant Jake's pulse spiked as the realization hit him. They're coming aboard. As if in response, his ship's warning alarms blared. The Dominion was locking onto him with a tractor beam. He had seconds before they took him. Jake's jaw tightened. He wasn't going to be taken. The reckless plan. His hands moved before his brain could stop him. He flipped every switch on the control panel, rerouting power to the engines, overloading them. The ship shuddered, metal groaning in protest as the system overheated instantly. Ziara's voice was sharp. "What are you doing?" Jake grabbed his blaster, securing it to his belt. "Buying us a chance." He bolted from the cockpit just as the ship rattled violently. The Dominion's boarding party had latched onto the airlock. They were coming through. Jake ran. Not to hide. Not to surrender. To face them head-on. Boarding party. The airlock hissed, and the doors blew open in a burst of smoke and light. 6 Dominion soldiers stormed in, weapons raised, moving with the cold efficiency of trained killers. Jake had no cover. No chance. But Ziara was already inside him, guiding his hands, sharpening his senses. And for the first time, he didn't resist. Jake moved. His blaster flashed. His shots fired before the soldiers could react. The first soldier dropped instantly, his armor scorched. The second fired back. Jake ducked before the shot even left the barrel, twisting to the side, as if he had known exactly where it would go. Not Jake's instincts. Ziara's. The third soldier lunged at him. Jake spun, his elbow colliding with the soldier's throat, sending him crashing to the floor. Too fast, too precise. The last 3 surrounded him, weapons aimed directly at his heart. Jake froze. And then, a new presence entered the ship. A deadly arrival. The Dominion soldiers lowered their weapons instantly, stepping aside like obedient machines. And through the smoke, a figure emerged. Tall, cloaked in black and silver armor, eyes like molten gold. Jake's breath stopped. Not human, not Dominion, but Xelfar, a warrior, a survivor, and on their wrist, an identical bracelet. Jake's stomach dropped. The figure stepped forward, their voice cold as death. "You are not worthy of the bond, human." Jake's pulse thundered in his ears. Ziara's voice inside his mind was calm, steady. "This is what I was afraid of." Jake swallowed hard. "Who the hell is that?" Ziara didn't hesitate. "The last Xelfar warlord." Jake's fingers tightened around his blaster. "And they just found us. The war has only begun." The Xelfar warrior raised a hand, and in an instant, Jake felt his body seize. Not pain, not an attack, but the bond. Their bracelets glowed in unison, the energy between them rippling like a current of raw power. And then Jake realized the truth. The bond wasn't just a connection. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a curse. And he wasn't the only one trapped in it. The Xelfar warrior's voice was calm. "Absolute. Your life does not belong to you anymore, human. You are part of something far greater." They raised their blade. "And if you refuse, I will end you myself." Jake's jaw tightened. The fight for survival was over. Now it was a fight for control. And if he lost this one, he wouldn't just die. He would become something else entirely.